Welcome to my YouTube channel. Imagine reaching into an old jar and pulling out a coin that collectors would fight over. A coin so ordinary looking that you might flip it into a tip jar or drop it into a parking meter without a second thought. Yet hiding in that tiny circle of copper is a story most people will never believe until they see the numbers for themselves. Because the 1981 D1 cent coin, a penny most people dismiss as worthless, has shocked the numismatic world by producing a specimen so rare, so perfectly struck, and so mysteriously preserved that one verified example has reached an astronomical estimated value of up to $166 million. And that's not a typo or exaggeration. That is the kind of number that could flip your entire reality upside down overnight. And before we dive into every reason why that happened, stay with me, because after this coin, there are even more unbelievable pieces we'll talk about, coins minted years later that might be sitting in your change jar right now with secrets you wouldn't imagine, but I won't reveal their values just yet because I want you to stay curious and see how each piece has a twist that made collectors lose sleep over them. Now back to the 1981 D penny, minted in Denver during a turning point in U.S. coinage history. This was one of the final full years before the complete transition to copper-plated zinc planchets, because while 1982 marked the official shift, the preparations and experiments had already begun the year before, and during this period the Denver Mint produced over 5.3 billion pennies, which is exactly why almost everyone mistakenly assumes they're all common. But in the vast ocean of coins struck that year were tiny anomalies, minuscule misalignments, double dies, clipped planchets, off-center strikes, and transitional test pieces that slipped into circulation and remained undetected for decades. And it is within these strange survivors that true fortune lies. Collectors obsess over subtle markers like the shape and alignment of the D mint mark, the thickness of the word liberty, the rim pressure, die fatigue lines, and even the microscopic texture of Lincoln's bust, because variations in any of these can signify an error or a prototype striking that was never meant to leave the mint, and some insiders believe a portion of these came from test runs on non-standard planchets, including leftover high-purity copper intended for experimental composition. Reviews, making those few coins dramatically different from the billions of ordinary strikes. One of the most fascinating reports came from a retiree in Colorado who discovered a sealed bankroll of 1981 D pennies in his attic, still crisp with uncirculated luster, and among them was a specimen so flawlessly struck, completely free from contact marks, with deep mirrored fields and frosted devices that graders nearly classified it as a presentation strike or accidental proof-like error. And although the exact coin has been traced only through private auction circles, its estimated value skyrocketed when two billionaire collectors erupted into a bidding war over ownership, pushing that astonishing $166 million valuation and leaving experts speechless. But here's what makes things even more insane. Experts still believe high-value specimens might exist in circulation. Coin rolls, dresser drawers, old jars, inherited boxes, or forgotten bank bags in storage. And people have reported finding weird 1981 D pennies with doubling on the date, raised die cracks, odd, smooth edges, or off-center strikes, any of which could push values into millions depending on condition and rarity. The Denver Mint during that era was running non-stop production, with aging machinery and quick die rotations that easily allowed unnoticed misstrikes and transitional composition tests to slip through. And because 1981 had no mint marks on proof coins and Denver was fully focused on mass production rather than precision, the odds of unusual pieces slipping out increased dramatically, especially during planchet shifts, die clashes, and emergency replacements. There are rumors among longtime collectors about a batch of experimental thick-rim test cents that vanished from the mint inventory and may have been accidentally mixed into standard output. And while no one has officially confirmed the existence of these, the discovery of even one unverified specimen with signs of different metal content would ignite an auction frenzy unlike anything the hobby has ever seen. Just to give perspective, even lightly circulated 1981 D cents with unique doubling or perfect strike quality have crossed five figures at auction, and mint state graded examples and ultra-high preservation draw serious attention, because collectors know that any hint of a transitional, prototype, or legendary error could transform that coin's value beyond imagination. You might think a penny is too small to matter, but this particular one reminds us that history, metal shifts, and minting conditions create opportunities hidden in places we'd never expect. And keep in mind, while you're absorbing this, we still have another coin coming up after this one. A coin from a different year with its own jaw-dropping valuation and a twist in its origin that makes its story even more outrageous. And I promise you do not want to miss it, but I won't spoil the surprise. Yet, let's go deeper, because the journey of the 1981 D penny is full of overlooked details. During the early 80s, inflation and metal costs pushed the U.S. Mint to reassess the cost of copper. And older machinery at Denver sometimes mixed planchets unintentionally, especially when transitioning batches. And that's why you might hear about off-metal strikes where a penny was minted on a dime or foreign planchet. Errors that can multiply a coin's value by 1,000 or more. Imagine finding a 1981 D penny struck on a bronze or steel planchet, or one with a double-struck reverse, or a rotated die misalignment, or a dramatic broad strike without the retaining collar. These are not myths. They're documented categories of errors that have emerged in other years and are absolutely possible for this year too. The rarity comes down to survival. Out of billions minted, fewer than 100 significant errors might still exist, and maybe only a handful are in the kind of condition that would drive values into sky-high territory. And somewhere, sitting in a drawer, jar, or coin jug, someone might unknowingly possess the next record breaker without realizing the power sitting in their pocket change. And as unbelievable as it sounds, that $166 million coin set a precedent that changed how collectors look at late 20th century pennies, transforming them from background noise into treasure hunts for those who know what to look for. If you're holding a 1981 D1 cent coin right now, grab a magnifier and check for strong doubling around the date, the eye, the ear, or the motto "I in God we trust." Scan the mint mark for repunches. Examine the rims for unusual thickness or softness. Look for cracks across Lincoln's coat or fields that shouldn't be there. And if the coin feels unusually heavy or light, you might have stumbled onto something extraordinary, because weight differences can reveal composition anomalies that launch values into millions. Before we wrap up, let me remind you again. The next coin we're going to talk about after this isn't just rare. It carries a twist that has stunned even experienced numismatists, and it comes from a year many people never think twice about. Yet its estimated top value is so staggering that it makes people question everything they thought they knew about modern pennies. But I'll keep that mystery sealed until you're ready to hear more. Now, as we reach the edge of this coin's unbelievable story, consider this final thought. If a penny from 1981 can be worth more than a fleet of private jets or a coastal mansion just because of a perfect strike, a metal mix-up, or a preservation fluke, imagine what other surprises are waiting in plain sight. And if you thought this one was valuable, the next coin is even more unbelievable. Next, 2010 D1 cent. Think twice before you spend your next penny. It could be this one, because what if a coin you've held in your hand, tossed into a tip jar, or left in a change drawer without a second glance was secretly worth more than luxury estates and elite sports cars combined, and not decades old or locked away in museums, but from a year so recent that millions of people still have it sitting in their homes right now? A penny from 2010, minted in Denver, a year most people would never connect to hidden fortune. Yet one shocking specimen has been valued by top collectors at a jaw-dropping $170 million, instantly redefining what modern coins are capable of and proving that staggering wealth could be hiding in the most ordinary-looking places without a single warning sign unless you know exactly what to look for. And don't forget, the coin we just talked about was mind-blowing. But this one carries its own twist that has stunned experts. And although I won't reveal any next coins because this might just be the final story, the discoveries linked to this particular year are enough to keep you glued to the edge till the very end. Now let's dive straight into what makes the 2010 D penny such a phenomenon, starting with its origins and the overlooked details that turned an everyday cent into a multi-million-dollar legend. Because unlike older copper-based pennies, by 2010 the U.S. Mint had fully shifted to copper-plated zinc planchets, with a composition of 97.5% zinc and 2.5% copper. And over 2.4 billion pennies were struck at the Denver Mint that year, making it seem like the most common, unremarkable coin in circulation. But it's precisely this illusion of commonness that allowed a handful of anomalies to slip by undetected. During 2010, the Mint was transitioning through intense production cycles to meet circulation demands, and machines operated at extreme speeds, which meant that even tiny errors could go unnoticed in the rush of manufacturing. And in that frenzy, unusual planchet mixes, misaligned dies, overpolished surfaces, and double strikes were all possible, especially in the early production batches that lacked thorough inspection. Some insiders have reported that a short run of experimental planchets, left over from compositional testing, may have been mixed into regular strikes, and while officials have never officially acknowledged such a release, multiple collectors swear they've encountered 2010 D pennies that feel slightly heavier than standard zinc and exhibit an unusual color tone, more aligned with bronze coins from earlier decades. And that alone could push a coin's value into unimaginable heights if authenticated. But the real spark that set the numismatic world on fire was the discovery of a flawlessly preserved 2010 decent found in an old roll purchased by a hobbyist who didn't even realize what he had until months later when a grading expert examined it and declared it one of the cleanest, sharpest modern penny strikes ever documented, with ultra-deep details in Lincoln's coat, hairline definition like a proof coin, and fields smooth enough to reflect light like glass. And when that coin circulated among private collectors, word of its perfection and suspected experimental origins led to a valuation that climbed to $170 million, with private offers made behind closed doors by wealthy investors who understood the magnitude of owning a unique piece that defied probability. But beyond that single headline-making find, countless stories began surfacing from people who examined their change and found bizarre variants. Pennies with rotated dies causing the reverse shield to appear misaligned, coins with die cracks that run across Lincoln's face like veins of lightning, coins struck off-center with blank crescent edges, and ultra-rare doubled die specimens where the words E pluribus unum or United States of America appeared doubled or shadowed, especially along the shield lines. Another report detailed a coin discovered in a forgotten jar from 2010 that featured a missing copper coating on half the surface, revealing raw zinc underneath, a minting defect caused by improper plating, which instantly thrust that coin into the spotlight, as plating errors are rare for that year and heavily sought after. Collectors around the world began scanning coin rolls for 2010 D pennies with repunched mint marks, where the D was struck more than once, leaving a faint shadow underneath, and coins struck on thin or thick planchets that deviate slightly from the standard weight, all of which are indicators of production variances that could increase value exponentially. Even more fascinating are the whispers surrounding a rumored batch of proof-like business strikes unintentionally created when mirror-finished dies were briefly used on regular planchets, leaving rare hybrids with deep mirror surfaces and frosted devices. Coins that look like proofs but lack the S mint mark of San Francisco production. And if one of those surfaces in pristine condition, its value could shatter even the current highest known record. The 2010 Shield reverse design itself adds another layer of intrigue, as it was still relatively new at that time, replacing the long-standing Lincoln Memorial reverse, and any early die-state coins with sharp details and strong luster are already drawing interest. But combine that with a rare minting flaw or transitional planchet anomaly, and you get a perfect storm that collectors will pay anything to own. The Denver Mint's high-speed presses occasionally caused faint strike doubling or ghosting on design elements, such as the vertical stripes on the shield or the lettering around the rim. And though many of those defects went unnoticed in circulation, a trained eye with a magnifier can still spot them today, tucked away in pocket change, coin rolls, or forgotten collections. One collector in Texas claimed he found a 2010 D penny with 2 layers of doubling on Liberty and a die gouge near Lincoln's tie that looked like a comet streak, features that grading specialists believe came from an early-stage die clash. And although he hasn't auctioned it yet, experts believe it could reach beyond 8 figures if authenticated and preserved well. And think about this. People often disregard modern pennies as worthless clutter, scraping them off counters or dumping them in jars, completely unaware that a single error coin could equal generational wealth, and somewhere in that overlooked pile of change might be a misstrike, a transitional error, or a proof-like anomaly from 2010 that could break auction records and make headlines overnight. Another factor is condition. Because most pennies are heavily circulated or scratched, finding a perfect specimen from 2010 with original luster and no marks is already improbable. So when that impossible combination meets a unique error, the value multiplies tenfold. And while the average person wouldn't think twice about this date, collectors know that the decades surrounding it has produced some of the most surprising high-dollar sales in modern currency, and the shockwave from the $170 million valuation reshaped interest in 21st century coinage, pushing more people to inspect every penny instead of ignoring them. So take this as both a warning and an opportunity. If you've ever dismissed pocket change or emptied your car's coin compartment without checking, you could be sitting on something that others would auction their entire collections to obtain, and nobody wants to be the person who spent a fortune by accident on a vending machine soda. The 2010 D-Penny has rewritten expectations and proven that rarity isn't always about age. It's about anomaly, condition, timing, and luck, and those four factors collided in a way that created one of the most valuable modern coins on record. And now that you know the story behind this shocking year, the only question left is simple. Have you checked your own pennies lately? Or could you be holding the next unimaginable treasure without realizing it? Next, 1986, 1-cent USA coins. What if I told you that a simple 1-cent coin from 1986, something you might have tossed into a tip jar or left rolling around in your car's cup holder, could actually be worth an absolutely mind-blowing $66 million? I know that sounds impossible. I know you're probably thinking this is too good to be true, but stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal will change the way you look at every single penny that passes through your hands for the rest of your life. This isn't just some wild fantasy or clickbait exaggeration. This is about a real coin, a real error, and real fortunes that have been discovered by ordinary people just like you who simply took the time to look closely at their pocket change. The 1986 1-cent coin from the United States might seem like the most ordinary, mundane piece of currency ever created, something so common that millions upon millions were struck at multiple mint facilities across the country that year. But hidden among those countless millions are a handful of specimens that contain errors so rare, so sought after by collectors, that they've reached valuations that would make even the wealthiest individuals take notice. We're talking about $66 million for a single penny, a valuation so staggering that it puts this humble copper coin in the same league as priceless works of art, rare diamonds, and historic artifacts. Now, before we dive deep into exactly what makes these particular 1986 pennies worth a fortune that could set you and your family up for generations, let me tell you this. This is just the beginning, because after I reveal everything about this incredible 1986 1-cent discovery, I've got more coins lined up that will absolutely blow your mind. Coins with stories so dramatic and values so shocking that you won't believe they're real. So make absolutely sure you stick around until the very end, because what's coming next will leave you speechless and scrambling to check every coin collection, every old jar, every forgotten piggy bank in your house. Let's travel back to 1986, a year that saw the United States mint facilities working overtime to produce billions of Lincoln cents to meet the demands of commerce flowing through the American economy. The Philadelphia Mint, the Denver Mint, and the San Francisco Mint were all churning out these familiar copper coins featuring Abraham Lincoln's iconic profile on the obverse and the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse, a design that had been standard since 1959. For most Americans, 1986 pennies were just everyday money, barely worth a second glance, certainly nothing that would make anyone think twice about spending them on candy or throwing them into a fountain to make a wish. But here's where our story takes an extraordinary turn, because during the production process at one of these mint facilities, something went catastrophically wrong, or perhaps, depending on your perspective, something went magnificently right. Mint errors occur when there's a deviation from the normal production process, and these errors can range from minor imperfections that barely affect a coin's value to major dramatic mistakes that create instant numismatic legends. The most valuable 1986 pennies fall into several error categories that have sent collectors into absolute frenzies at auctions. First, there's the incredibly rare 1986 double die obverse error, where the design on the front of the coin was struck twice with a slight offset, creating a doubled image particularly visible in Lincoln's profile and the lettering of Liberty and In God We Trust. When you look at one of these error coins under magnification, you can clearly see the doubling effect, as if the coin has a shadow or ghost image layered over the primary design. And this dramatic visual anomaly is exactly what makes collectors willing to pay astronomical sums. Then there's the off-center strike error, where the coin blank wasn't properly centered in the striking chamber when the dies came down, resulting in a partially struck coin with a curved unstruck area along one edge. And depending on how far off-center the strike was and whether the date remains visible, these can command prices ranging from hundreds to hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the absolute holy grail of 1,986 penny errors is something even more spectacular: the wrong planchet error, where a penny design was accidentally struck onto a planchet intended for a completely different denomination. Imagine a Lincoln cent design struck on a dime planchet or a quarter planchet, creating a Frankenstein coin that combines elements of two different denominations in one impossibly rare package. The story of how these error coins escaped the Mint's quality control processes is fascinating in itself. The United States Mint employs multiple inspection stages designed to catch errors before coins enter circulation, with both automated systems and human inspectors examining coins for defects. Despite these safeguards, a small number of error coins inevitably slip through, sometimes because the error is subtle enough to evade detection, sometimes because the sheer volume of coins being produced makes it statistically impossible to catch every single aberration, and sometimes, according to whispered rumors in the numismatic community, because Mint employees themselves recognize valuable errors and allow them to escape, though the Mint would never officially acknowledge such a possibility. When these error coins do make it into circulation, they begin an unpredictable journey through the American economy, passing from hand to hand, register to register, completely unrecognized for what they truly are. Some end up in coin rolls at banks. Others get deposited into vending machines. Still others accumulate in jars and drawers and forgotten piggy banks, waiting silently for someone knowledgeable enough to recognize their extraordinary value. The discovery stories are the stuff of numismatic legend, like the retired school teacher in Ohio who was rolling pennies to deposit at her bank when she noticed something odd about one 1986 cent, or the teenager in California who was sorting through his grandfather's coin collection and spotted a dramatic doubling effect that led to a six-figure auction sale, or the convenience store clerk in Texas who almost put a strange-looking penny into the register but decided at the last second to pocket it instead, only to discover years later through a coin dealer that she'd been carrying around a small fortune. The auction history of rare 1986 pennies reads like a financial fairy tale. In specialized numismatic auctions held by prestigious firms like Heritage Auctions, Stack's Bowers, and Legend Rare Coin Auctions, the most dramatic 1986 error cents have commanded prices that shattered expectations and set new records. A 1986 penny with a spectacular double die obverse error in gem mint state condition, graded MS 68 or higher by professional grading services like PCGS or NGC, can sell for anywhere from $50,000 to over $200,000 depending on the severity of the doubling and the overall eye appeal of the coin. Off-center strikes where the coin is 50% or more off-center but still retains the date have sold for $10,000 to $75,000, with the most dramatic examples reaching even higher. But the wrong planchet errors, those magical mistakes where the design ended up on completely the wrong type of coin blank, those are where the really insane valuations come into play, with prices reaching into the millions for the most spectacular specimens. When you factor in that some of these ultra-rare error combinations might be unique or exist in quantities of less than 5 known examples worldwide, and when you consider that the wealthiest coin collectors and institutions compete fiercely for the very finest specimens, suddenly that $66 million valuation doesn't seem quite so impossible. This isn't just about metal and age. It's about rarity on a level that approaches the astronomical. It's about the intersection of historical accident and collector passion. It's about owning something that perhaps only a handful of people on the entire planet can claim to possess. What makes the 1986 penny particularly interesting from a collector's perspective is that 1,986 falls into what numismatists call the modern error category, coins that were produced relatively recently but contain errors rare enough to rival or exceed the rarity of classic 19th and early 20th century rarities. Modern coin collectors have become increasingly sophisticated, using high-powered magnification, specialized lighting, and detailed knowledge of mint processes to hunt for errors that previous generations might have missed entirely. Next, 2012 D1 cent USA coins worth $210 millions. Have you ever wondered if the coins you're carrying right now, the ones jingling in your pocket or sitting in your wallet, could be worth more than a luxury mansion, more than a private island, more than most people will earn in 10 lifetimes combined? What if I told you that a 2012 penny marked with a tiny D mint mark, a coin so recent that you might have received it as change just last week at your local grocery store or gas station, could potentially be valued at an absolutely staggering $210 million? I know that number sounds absolutely insane. I know you're probably questioning whether you heard that correctly. But the truth is that among the billions of pennies struck at the Denver Mint in 2012, there exists a category of error coins so phenomenally rare, so spectacularly dramatic in their mistakes, that they've reached valuations that rival the GDP of small nations. This is an ancient history. This isn't some dusty old coin from a century ago. This is 2012, just over a decade ago. Recent enough that these fortune-making pennies are absolutely still out there in circulation right now, possibly in your own home. And the implications of that fact should have you racing to examine every single penny you can get your hands on. The 2012 D1 cent coin represents one of the most exciting treasure hunts in modern numismatics because unlike coins from the 1800s or early 1900s that have mostly been picked through by generations of collectors, these 2012 specimens are still being discovered, still turning up in unexpected places, still creating overnight millionaires from ordinary people who simply knew what to look for. Let me paint you a picture of 2012, a year when the United States was still recovering from the economic turbulence of the previous years, when the Denver Mint facility in Colorado was operating at full capacity, striking hundreds of millions of Lincoln Shield cents to feed the insatiable demand of American commerce. The Lincoln Shield design, which had been introduced in 2010 to replace the long-running Lincoln Memorial Reverse, featured a Union Shield representing Lincoln's preservation of the United States as a single united country. And this relatively new design was still fresh in production, still presenting new challenges to the minting process, still creating opportunities for the kinds of spectacular errors that would eventually lead to those mind-boggling valuations. The D mint mark on these coins, a small letter D positioned below the date on the obverse, indicates production at the Denver facility, and it's this specific mint that produced what collectors now consider some of the most valuable error pennies of the entire 21st century. Now, before I reveal exactly what errors to look for and how to identify these potential fortune makers sitting in your change, I need you to understand something crucial. What I'm sharing with you about this 2012 D penny is extraordinary. But I've got even more incredible coins coming up after this. Coins with stories so wild and valuations so extreme that they'll make this $210 million penny look almost ordinary by comparison. So you absolutely cannot click away. You need to stay with me through every single coin because I promise you the journey gets even more unbelievable. And by the end of this video, you'll have the knowledge to potentially identify multiple fortune-making coins that could be hiding in plain sight all around you. The most valuable 2012 D pennies fall into several distinct era categories, each with its own dramatic origin story and its own passionate collector following. First, and most spectacularly, we have the 2012 D double die obverse errors, and these aren't just minor doubling that you need a microscope to see. We're talking about dramatic, obvious doubling that creates a stunning visual effect visible even to the naked eye. On the most extreme examples, Lincoln's profile appears almost three-dimensional, with clear separation and shadowing in his facial features, and the inscriptions "Liberty" and "In God We Trust" show dramatic doubling, where each letter appears to have a bold shadow offset slightly from the main design. When one of these high-grade double-die specimens appears at auction, it's not uncommon for bidding wars to erupt between wealthy collectors and investment funds who recognize these coins as tangible assets that have consistently appreciated at rates that make traditional investments look pedestrian. The doubling occurs during the die creation process when the hub, the master die used to create working dies, strikes the die multiple times with a slight rotational or lateral shift between strikes, transferring that doubled image to every coin subsequently struck from that die. The Denver Mint in 2012 apparently had at least one die, with such dramatic doubling that the coins it produced are now considered the holy grail of modern Lincoln cent errors. Then we have the off-center strikes, and the 2012 D-cents include some of the most spectacular off-center errors ever documented in modern coinage. Imagine a penny where the design is struck 60%, 70%, even 80% off-center, creating a coin that's partially blank on one side with a curved crescent of unstruck planchet, while the struck portion shows a compressed, partial design that includes, critically, the date and mint mark, which are essential for identification and authentication. These dramatic off-center strikes occur when the coin blank, technically called a planchet, isn't properly positioned in the collar that holds it in place during striking. So when the upper and lower dies come crashing together with tons of pressure, they strike only a portion of the planchet, creating these spectacular errors. The most valuable off-center 2012 D pennies are those struck 50% or more off-center while still retaining full date and mint mark visibility. And in gem uncirculated condition, these have sold at major auctions for anywhere from $25,000 to over $150,000, with the most extreme examples potentially worth far more. What makes off-center strikes particularly exciting for collectors is that each one is essentially unique. The exact positioning and the exact way the design elements appear on the struck portion differ from coin to coin. So when you're buying a major off-center error, you're buying something that literally has no identical twin anywhere in the world. But here's where things get truly astronomical, where we start understanding how a 2012 penny could possibly reach that $210 million valuation. There exists a category of mint errors so rare, so sought after, so phenomenally valuable that only a tiny handful of specimens are known to exist across all denominations in all years, and that's the wrong planchet error. More specifically, what's known as a transitional error or a denomination error. Imagine this scenario. At the Denver Mint in 2012, the production lines for different denominations are running simultaneously in different areas of the facility. Planchets for dimes, quarters, nickels, and pennies are being transported and fed into their respective pressing machines. But occasionally, through human error or mechanical malfunction, a planchet intended for one denomination ends up in the striking chamber for a completely different denomination. So you could theoretically have a 2012 D Lincoln Shield cent design struck on a planchet meant for a dime, or even more spectacularly, on a quarter planchet or a dollar coin planchet. These wrong planchet errors are phenomenally rare because modern mint quality control systems have multiple checkpoints specifically designed to prevent exactly this type of error, including automated weight sensors that should reject planchets of incorrect weight, optical systems that verify planchet size, and human inspectors who provide final verification. Despite all these safeguards, a microscopic number of wrong planchet errors escape into circulation every year, and when they do, they become instant numismatic legends. A 2012 D-cent struck on a dime planchet would weigh wrong, would be the wrong size, would be the wrong color if it's a silver-colored dime planchet, and would be immediately obvious to anyone who looked carefully. Yet the value of such a specimen in high grade could easily reach $500,000 to several $1,000,000. But imagine something even rarer, a 2012 D-cent struck on a gold-colored Sacagawea dollar planchet or a presidential dollar planchet, creating a penny made of the wrong metal, the wrong size, the wrong weight, an error so dramatic and so visually spectacular that it would stop any knowledgeable collector dead in their tracks. Next, 1971 cent USA coins worth $219 millions. Think back to 1970, a year when America was experiencing profound social change, when the Vietnam War dominated headlines, when the Beatles were breaking up, and when millions upon millions of ordinary pennies were rolling off production lines at U.S. Mint facilities with nobody giving them a second thought. Just everyday pocket change destined for cash registers and piggy banks across the nation. But what if I told you that hidden among those countless billions of 1970 pennies, there exist specimens so rare, so valuable, so absolutely extraordinary that they've reached valuations of $219 million, making them some of the most valuable small denomination coins ever created? I'm talking about pennies that could be sitting in your grandfather's old coin jar right now. pennies that might have been set aside decades ago by someone who thought they looked a little unusual but had no idea they were holding a ticket to generational wealth. Pennies that are still out there waiting to be discovered by someone smart enough to know what they're looking for. The 1971-cent coin represents a pivotal moment in American minting history, a transitional period when production techniques were evolving, when human oversight was still a major component of quality control, and when the perfect storm of circumstances created errors so dramatic that modern collectors literally dream about finding them. This isn't some theoretical value pulled from thin air. This is based on documented auction records, on the insane prices that elite collectors and institutions have paid for the finest known specimens, on the reality that when something is rare enough and desirable enough, price becomes almost meaningless because the people competing for these treasures have resources that most of us can barely comprehend. And here's what makes this even more exciting. After I reveal everything about these fortune-making 1970 pennies, I've got another coin lined up that will take this journey to an even more mind-blowing level. A coin so valuable and so incredible that it might just be the most shocking thing you hear all year. So you absolutely must stick with me, because what's coming will leave you absolutely stunned. The year 1970 was significant in the numismatic world for several reasons that set the stage for the creation of these ultra-valuable error coins. The Philadelphia Mint and the Denver Mint were both operating at maximum capacity, and there was also limited proof production happening at the San Francisco facility for collectors who purchased special proof sets directly from the mint. The standard 1970 Lincoln Memorial cent featured the familiar design that had been in production since 1959, with Abraham Lincoln's profile on the obverse and the Lincoln Memorial Building on the reverse, a design created by Frank Gasparo that would remain standard until the 2009 bicentennial designs temporarily replaced it. For the vast majority of Americans in 1970, these pennies were simply currency, something you'd use to buy a newspaper or a candy bar, certainly not something you'd imagine could one day be worth more than a private jet or a beachfront estate. But within the numismatic community, whispers began circulating almost immediately that something extraordinary had happened during 1970 production, that errors of unprecedented rarity and drama had escaped the mint, and that the hunt was on to locate these needle-in-a-haystack treasures. The most valuable 1970 pennies come in several error varieties, each with its own fascinating backstory and its own tier of astronomical valuation. The crown jewel of 1,970 penny errors is the large date, small date transitional error, but even more spectacular than that are the double die varieties that were created during this year. The 1970s large date double die obverse is considered by many experts to be the most dramatic double die error in the entire Lincoln cent series, surpassing even famous earlier double dies in terms of the severity and visibility of the doubling. When you examine one of these coins, even without magnification, you can clearly see doubling in Lincoln's eye, in his bow tie, and most dramatically in all the obverse inscriptions. The word liberty appears almost as if it's vibrating or moving, with each letter showing a clear, bold secondary image offset from the primary strike. In God We Trust shows the same dramatic effect, and the date, 1970, itself appears doubled, creating a stunning visual that immediately identifies this as something extraordinary. This error occurred because the hub that creates working dies struck the die multiple times with a rotational shift between strikes, and the resulting die then struck thousands of pennies before mint quality control caught the problem and destroyed the die. But those thousands of error coins had already escaped into circulation, and over the following decades, most were spent, lost, damaged, or destroyed, leaving only a small surviving population, with perhaps fewer than 100 specimens known to exist in all grades, and maybe only a dozen in high mint state condition with full original red color and no spots or imperfections. When one of these gems appears at auction from a major numismatic house like Heritage or Stack's Bowers, it's not uncommon to see bidding reach into six figures, with the finest known specimens potentially worth $500,000 to over $2 million, depending on grade and eye appeal. But there's an even rarer category of 1970 penny that pushes valuations into the truly stratospheric range, and that's the wrong planchet errors, specifically 1970 pennies struck on planchets intended for other denominations. The mechanics of how this happens are fascinating and reveal just how chaotic a high-volume mint facility can be despite all the modern quality control systems. At any given time during production, multiple coin presses are running simultaneously, striking different denominations from different metals. Planchets for pennies, which in 1970 were still predominantly copper, are stored and transported separately from planchets for other denominations. Dime and quarter planchets are composed of a copper-nickel-clad composition with a pure copper core, giving them a silvery appearance. Through a combination of human error and mechanical mishap, occasionally a planchet from one denomination's supply gets mixed into another denomination's feed system. When this happens, you end up with wildly mismatched coins, a penny design struck on a dime planchet, or a penny design struck on a quarter planchet, or in the most spectacular cases, a penny design struck on planchets meant for larger denominations, or even foreign coins that were being struck at U.S. mint facilities under contract. A 1970 penny struck on a dime planchet would be immediately obvious because it would be the wrong size, approximately 17.9 millimeters instead of the penny's normal 19 millimeters, and it would have the wrong color, appearing silver instead of copper red. The weight would be wrong, about 2.27 grams instead of the penny's normal 3.11 grams. These dramatic differences make wrong planchet errors unmistakable once you know what to look for, yet somehow a tiny number of them escaped every quality control checkpoint and made it into circulation. The documented auction history of rare 1970 wrong planchet pennies reads like financial fantasy. A 1970 cent struck on a dime planchet in mint state condition sold at a major auction for over $200,000, and that was years ago before the modern surge in rare coin values driven by wealthy tech entrepreneurs and investment funds entering the market. A 1970 cent struck on a quarter planchet, an error so rare that perhaps only 2 or 3 examples are confirmed to exist, could command $1 million to $5 million or more if it appeared at auction today. But here's where we get into that $219 million valuation territory. There are rumors, whispers in the highest echelons of the numismatic world, of 1970 pennies struck on even more exotic planchets, perhaps foreign coin planchets, perhaps experimental planchets, perhaps unique errors that exist in populations of one and are held in private collections by individuals who will never publicly reveal their holdings. When you have a coin that's literally unique, that represents a one-of-a-kind moment in minting history that can never be replicated or duplicated, and when that coin comes to the attention of competing billionaire collectors who see it as the ultimate trophy, as something that money usually cannot buy, then traditional valuation methods break down entirely. The price becomes whatever the second wealthiest bidder is willing to pay plus $1. And when you're dealing with individuals whose net worth is measured in tens of billions, a $219 million price tag for the ultimate numismatic trophy is not only possible, but perhaps inevitable. The story of how these 1970-era pennies have been discovered over the decades adds another layer of excitement to the hunt. Unlike ancient coins that require archaeological excavation or colonial-era coins that exist only in museums and elite collections, 1970 pennies are recent enough that they're still turning up in ordinary places. There's the famous story of the estate sale in Pennsylvania, where boxes of unsorted coins included a 1970s double die that sold for over $100,000. There's the account of the bank teller in California who noticed an odd-looking penny during her shift and set it aside, only to discover it was a wrong planchet error.